Hey guys, Justin here. I'm a big fan of using a quilt as part of my backpacking and camping sleep system. One of the benefits of a quilt is that when bought through a cottage manufacturer, they're very customizable. But I hear from a lot of people that choosing which options to go with for a quilt can be overwhelming and they have no idea what some of the options even mean. Today I want to help you navigate all those custom options so that you can come up with the perfect quilt for the conditions that you'll be using it in. And there are 10 different quilt options that I'm going to be talking about in the video. I know that's a lot, but that's just how customizable quilts can be. And I'll be focusing on the options available from 3 main quilt manufacturers. That's Underground Quilts, Hammock Gear, and Enlightened Equipment. I have either used quilts from these manufacturers or have good friends who have used their products, and all 3 companies are really great and I highly recommend them. The first option that you need to consider when deciding on a quilt is the temperature rating that you want. All 3 companies provide a comfort rating for their quilts, which is the temperature that the average person, usually a 30-year-old male, in medium weight base layers will be warm at. And I found that quilt manufacturers are very accurate in their comfort ratings, which is great. And you want to be choosing a temperature rating that will accommodate the temperatures that you're going to be seeing while out on trips. For me in the Canadian Rockies, where I do most of my camping and backpacking, it's usually just under freezing at night for most of the spring, summer, and fall. So I have a 20-degree Fahrenheit quilt that will work for 99% of the time in those 3 season conditions. If you sleep cold, consider getting a quilt rated for 10 to 20 degrees colder than what you'll experience. Usually women and people of slighter builds will sleep colder than the comfort ratings advertised. If in doubt, err on the side of caution and get a colder quilt, as quilts can dump heat very easily and are quite versatile. And you can use a cold quilt in warmer temperatures and it's not a problem at all. The next option to consider is fill power. Fill power is how fluffy the down feathers in the quilt are. The fluffier each feather is, the higher the fill power, and this is measured by how much volume in cubic inches 1 ounce of down fills up, usually measured in tubes. Fill power is not directly related to how warm a quilt is, which is a common misconception. An 850 power fill 20-degree quilt is just as warm as a 950 power fill 20-degree quilt. The 850 just requires more down to fill the quilt up. Fill power does affect 2 things though, weight and function. For weight, the higher the fill power, the less down you need to fill the quilt up, which results in a lower overall weight. For function, lower fill power tends to be less affected by moisture and dirt because there's more down surface area to deal with those things. Manufacturers mostly offer between 800 and 950 power fill, with the higher power fill costing more but weighing less. So in choosing a quilt, you need to decide for yourself whether it's worth paying the extra money to save an ounce or so by going with higher power fill. But personally, I think 850 is really the sweet spot for price, weight, and performance. When looking at down fill, you may notice some companies advertising down as being from ducks or geese. And there's really no noticeable difference in performance or quality between duck or goose down. The main difference is that goose down has inherently fluffier feathers, so it's more often used for higher fill power down products and is generally seen in more expensive products. The next option to consider is denier, and denier is how thick the fibers or individual threads that make up the fabric are. The most common denier is 10 denier and 20 denier, but Enlightened Equipment also offers an ultralight 7 denier fabric. Something to keep in mind with denier is that generally the thicker denier fabrics like the 20D are less air permeable than the fabrics like 10 or 7D. And where this comes into play is that if you have moisture that's trying to escape, then you want that lower denier fabric on the inside of your quilt. So I recommend having only 7D or 10D as the fabric inner, and then you may consider 20D as the fabric outer. If you use 20 denier fabric on the inner, you're probably going to feel really clammy and wet, and it's not going to be as comfortable as a sleep. And those lower denier fabrics are also lighter than the higher denier fabrics. So a 7 denier fabric is 30% lighter than a 10 denier, and then a 10 denier is 70% lighter than a 20 denier. And the most common fabric used for quilts is 10 denier. It provides a good balance of weight, durability, air permeability, and comfort. And that's what I have in my quilt here. This is 10 denier inner, 10 denier outer. The fourth option you can customize is color. And like denier, you can customize and have different colors for the inner shell and the outer shell. You can see here, I have a nice red color on the outer shell and then black for the inner. Something to keep in mind when ordering is that the colors aren't consistent across the different denier fabrics. So you might not be able to get a 10 denier fabric in one color and then that same color in a 7 denier fabric. So just keep that in mind. You might be choosing a color and it might change what the denier of the fabric is. So just really keep an eye on that when you're ordering quilts. Option 5 is what kind of footbox you have. So the bottom of a quilt is very similar to a sleeping bag in that it fully encloses your lower legs and feet, but you can get either a sewn footbox or a zippered footbox. So what the zippered footbox allows is that you can completely unzip that footbox, and then it's possible to open the quilt up completely, and you can use it as a blanket, or if you're out on a warmer hike or warmer trip, then you can just fully open up the quilt and have it drape over top of you, and that might be a little bit nicer for not overheating in the middle of the night. Something to keep in mind with the zippered footbox is that you may get a few more drafts coming through the zipper here, and zippered footboxes have a hole in the end, and while you can cinch that hole up using toggles, there's always still going to be a little bit of a hole there that you may get drafts. And you can stuff a sock in there or some article of clothing, but it's just another thing you have to do and is a bit of a pain if you're asking me. While being able to unzip the quilt fully and use it as a blanket might be a nice feature, in practice I've never done that with my quilt, and from a lot of other people that I've heard from, they also in practice don't really unzip their quilt very often and use it as a blanket. The benefits of a sewn footbox, like I have on my Enigma here, is that the bottom is completely sewn, there's no zippers, there's no hole in the end, and because of that, there's less opportunities for drafts. Also, because there's no zipper and less hardware in the footbox, they're also generally lighter than a zippered footbox as well. If you sleep in warmer temperatures, most of the time above freezing, then maybe consider getting a quilt with a zippered footbox for that extra versatility. If you sleep at freezing or below most of the time, then I'd probably get a sewn footbox quilt. Option number 6 is quilt length. So all the companies provide a guide on their website for how long of a quilt you should get for your height. I'm 5'10", and for the Enlightened Equipment Enigma, I got the size regular, and I can just pull it up over my head. Related to length is quilt width, and I think this is one of the most important options to think about when you're buying a quilt, as there's a lot of different options out there. Manufacturers make quilts that are all the way from 50 inches wide up to 65 inches wide. And one of the things that you'll need to keep in mind is whether you're using a hammock or you're sleeping on the ground. If you're a hammock sleeper, you can get away with a narrower quilt like 50 inches wide because you're covered on 3 sides by your underquilt. If you're a ground sleeper, you want to go with a minimum of 55 inches. And if you're a little bit wider and thicker, or a side sleeper or an active sleeper, or you're using a thicker sleeping pad, then you'll want to go with a wider quilt. For my Enlightened Equipment quilt, I went with the wide width, which is 58 inches wide, and you can see all the widths and specs in their spec charts. And it's the perfect width for me at about 185 pounds, 40-inch chest, and I'm a very active sleeper and use wide sleeping pads, and the 58 inches is just perfect for me. It's not too narrow, but it's also not more width than I need. I can strap the quilt down to the sleeping pad, toss and turn all night, sleep on my side, and I don't get any drafts. If I was an even more active sleeper or a bigger guy, then I probably would have gone with a 60 or 65 inch width for my quilt. If you're a smaller build or not an active sleeper, then you can go with a narrower width quilt, and that's gonna save you in weight as well as cost. So just keep that in mind. If you're not a very large person, maybe you can get away with a 55 or 50-inch quilt and be completely comfortable. Another option that you might see on websites is Overstuff. And what Overstuff means is that there's just more down in the quilt than is needed to actually fill the volume. So it's a pretty simple calculation that manufacturers can use in order to figure out how much down is needed to fill up the volume of the quilt based on the power of the fill that's going into it. What Overstuff means is that they're taking that calculation and that minimum volume needed to fill up that quilt and then putting more down into it. And while Overstuff shouldn't be any warmer than an adequately stuffed quilt, you do have a few benefits with it. The down will deal with moisture a little bit better, deal with dirt a little bit better because there's more surface area to accommodate those things, as well as it'll deal with migration along the baffles a little bit better just because you have more down crammed into a smaller space, so there's less room for the down to move around in. Almost all companies overstuff a little bit. UGQ, Enlightened Equipment, and Hammock Gear all overstuff their quilts by 30%. So that's 30% more down in these quilts than is needed to meet that minimum volume. and UGQ and Hammock Gear offer an option for even more overstuff, but I think that's overkill. I don't think you need to go down that route. With the Enlighten equipment 30% overstuff, I've been more than happy with its ability to deal with down migration, moisture, and dirt, so maybe just consider the standard options with no overstuff. The next option is pad straps. If you're sleeping in a hammock, you don't need to worry about pad straps, but if you're on the ground, don't underestimate how important pad straps are for comfort and keeping you warm. And there's generally 2 types of pad straps and 3 types of pad strap attachment mechanisms that are out there with the different quilt manufacturers. The first type of pad strap is just a flat pad strap that goes underneath your pad or on top of the pad and then clips into the quilt. So that's what I have here. I have the pad strap going under the quilt and that just clips into the side right there. The other type of pad strap is a continuous pad strap. So this is a circular strap that goes all the way around your pad and then has clips right here. And that's what I have right here on the sleeping pad. You can see it goes all the way around and then clips in like so. And the continuous pad straps really lock your quilt in and are really good if you're in cold temperatures, whereas this other pad strap that goes underneath provides a little bit more movement and freedom while you're using your quilt, but doesn't lock the quilt down quite as well. It's really important to use pad straps, especially in cold temperatures, as they lock the quilt into the side of the sleeping pad and reduce any drafts that might come about, especially if you're sleeping very actively and tossing and turning a lot. The 3 type of pad attachment systems are wafer clips, like I have on the Enlighten equipment pad there. Hammock Gear uses a mitten hook, and then UGQ offers the wafer clips as well as a toggle. Enlighten equipment also makes a really interesting continuous pad strap that has 2 wafer clips on it and allows you to layer your quilts and then clip both into one pad strap so that you're not having to bring multiple pad straps, and it's a really convenient system if you're using your quilts in wintertime or laying your quilts for any other reason. Something to keep in mind is if you have a wide pad, then you want to make sure that you're ordering pad straps that are going to accommodate that. You might need to reach out to the manufacturers and just double check that their pad straps accommodate wide pads. As I know for Enlighten equipment, they have specific pad straps for wide pads, so just keep that in mind when you're ordering your quilt. Option number 10, and that's neck baffles. You'll see this on offer from UGQ and Enlighten equipment, and what that is a tube of down at the neck of the quilt that when you cinch up the neck, it really encloses the neck and makes sure that there's no air or drafts that can come in through that part of the quilt. And if you're sleeping in cold temperatures, definitely get the neck baffle. I find it super useful when camping below freezing down into the temperatures approaching sub-zero. Something to keep in mind with the fully customizable quilts is that they do take about 4 to 8 weeks to build and ship because every quilt's made to order. Enlighten equipment and UGQ both offer pre-made quilts sometimes, so check their website. They'll have those listed there. All 3 companies are awesome companies. If you have any questions at all about their quilts, give them a call, send them an email. They're really responsive. I've had great calls and email conversations with all 3 companies. If you have any questions for me, feel free to leave those in the comments section. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.